Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Freunde des Amboss Studientelegrams, Marcus at Home welcomes Dr. Robert Frenck in Cincinnati, Ohio, with whom we would like to discuss the issue of SARS-CoV-2 vaccination in children and adolescents. It's a privilege to have you with us, Dr. Frenck. Thanks for taking your time.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Frenck earned a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of California at San Diego and a medical degree from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. He completed a residency in pediatrics at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and a fellowship in pediatric infectious diseases at the University of Texas Health Science Center. Dr. Frenck is now director of the Vaccine Research Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, which is one of the top sites in the United States for the testing, evaluation, and development of vaccines. And Dr. Frenck is a principal investigator of the Vaccine Treatment and Evaluation Unit. Dr. Frenck substantially contributed to Operation Warp Speed. He is the principal investigator at Cincinnati Children's for Phase 1 Pfizer-BioNTech SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, as well as one of 5 investigators in the United States evaluating the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines in adolescents. Finally, he served in the U.S. Navy from 1977 to 2004, retiring as a captain. My co-moderators today are Dr. Sascha Meyer, who is professor of pediatrics in Saarland University Medical Center in Homburg, Germany, and Anja Scheuer, who is a medical student at Araplesion Markus Krankenhaus. My name is Gunnar Heine in Frankfurt, Germany.
Thank you, Dr. Frenck, for letting us interview you. My first question is, how high do you think the risk is for severe COVID-19 in children at all? Which I think it is an important question in order to evaluate the importance of vaccination in children.
Well, I think if you look at it, is that the rate of death or the incidence of death is far higher in people 60 and above. However, in the United States, as of last week, we had 330 children that have died from COVID. These were perfectly normal, healthy children that died from the infection. We've also had over 18,000 children hospitalized for COVID, and almost 4 million now that have been infected with the virus. So while the likelihood of getting very sick is low in children, is not zero, and these were, like I said, very healthy, normal children before they got COVID.
Mm-hmm. Do we know how many children have already had a SARS-CoV-2 infection so far?
So in the United States, we've had almost 4 million children that have been infected with COVID. And like I said, that's resulted in 18,500 hospitalizations and about 330 deaths. One of the things, too, is that there may be where people are wondering about why do we worry about the infection in the children? And part of it is that it is that direct effect, but also is the indirect effect as far as that with Dr. Heine, as far as that, in internal medicine, he may have adults that are exposed to the children that have been infected, and then the older people are the ones that get really sick. So those are really the 2 reasons that we need to look at vaccinating the children.
Okay. Have you seen many cases of the multisystem inflammatory syndrome that has been described?
So at our hospital, we have had 1 or 2 children that have had possible MIS-C, but we have really had very low. There have been more cases in New York City, but partly I think that was just because New York had more cases of COVID. So it's going to be a percentage as far as the percentage of the kids are going to get infected. Part of the problem with this infection and any other infection is that we can't tell who's going to be the person that's going to get really sick. And so if I had a way that I could do a blood test and say, okay, you're going to get really sick, that's the person that I would want to target and to be vaccinating and to make sure everyone's okay. But I don't have that. I don't know who's going to get really sick, and it can be anybody. And that's really why you need to vaccinate everyone, because everyone is at risk for severe disease.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about schools? There has been a great deal of discussion about schools in Germany and whether they should open or not. Are they risky in general? Are they risky for the kids themselves? Are they risky for their families and the teachers?
So I can tell you what our experience has been in the United States. And the experience in the United States has been, while, as I mentioned, we've had over 4 million children infected, that infection in schools has actually been pretty low. And the reason I think that happens is in the schools, you have a teacher watching the children. when they get out of school, at least in the United States, the older kids are wanting to go to the malls, or they want to go to restaurants, or they want to go to the parks and hang out with each other, and they don't have an adult that's supervising them. So the schools are important. And what we've been advocating is that as soon as the schools feel comfortable of having the children go back to school, they should go back to school. But that's really an individual school requirement or decision, because there's variations among schools. You know, one of the things, again, in the United States, is that unfortunately many children in the United States count on schools for providing them meals. And that so millions of children have gone, if I won't say hungry, but at least less food because they aren't having those school-based programs. And also for the schools is that we've shown in the United States, at least, that the school testing has not only stayed flat, it's actually dropped. Is so that the level for math and science, is which what they were evaluating, has actually decreased by 5 to 10% compared to the prior year. So there's a lot of issues as far as keeping kids out of school, and also their psychological issues, a lot of problems. We've had a 20% increase in psychiatric admissions in the United States, and we think a lot of it's directly related to COVID. So schools are important. Schools do bring a lot of kids close together, but if you use appropriate social distancing, we were asking the kids to wear masks in the school, and that having the kids part. You know, initially we started 6 feet apart, but we really found that 3 feet works just as well. That there were data to show that there's no improvement in, there's no decrease in rates of 6 feet versus 3 feet. So 3 feet is fine, and it actually then allows to have a lot more kids safely in school.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having you with us today, this afternoon. It's a privilege to have you, to talk to you. I have a question concerning your paper in the New England Journal that was published in May last month. Maybe you could wrap up the main results for our audience.
So this was a study where we were immunizing or vaccinating kids 12 to 15 years of age. And the goal, the purpose was to really look at immunobridging. And what that means is to be looking at the immune response in the 12 to 15-year-olds and comparing it to the 16 to 25-year-olds. And if we found that the immune response was equivalent, we were going to make the extrapolation, the assumption that the protection was going to be equivalent. What we found is that two major things, well, a few major things, but the first thing as far as for immune response, the immune response was actually superior in the 12 to 15-year-olds compared to the 16 to 25-year-olds. The second thing is that we had so much COVID in the adolescents that with only a little less than 3,000 kids, we were able to show the vaccine had efficacy. It was not powered for efficacy at all. It was powered for immunogenicity, but there was so much COVID, we were able to show the efficacy in about 3,000 compared to the adults where we were enrolling 45,000 almost. So that kind of gives you a perspective as far as how much COVID there was in the kids. And I think the other main result is that if you look at the side effects, the side effects that the kids had in the 12 to 15 and the frequency of the side effects the kids had in the 12 to 15-year-old group were identical to 16 to 25. I mean, you could literally overlap them. They were that similar.
Why did so many children who received placebo had side effects like headaches? That was kind of interesting.
So to me, that's the whole reason. A lot of people say, why do you have a placebo-controlled trial? And this really shows you why you have a placebo-controlled trial. When you're in a clinical trial, what you do is for the 7 days after the vaccine, we were asking people, did you have a headache? Did you have fatigue? Did you have muscle ache? Did you have chills? Did you have fever? And, you know, I think there's things that people a lot of times wouldn't even pay attention to, but somebody asks you, oh, well, you know, maybe I did have a headache, and that, you know, maybe I was a little fatigued. And so that's why it's so critical to have that control group, that placebo, so that you can see what things truly are attributable to the vaccine and what things are attributable to being in a clinical trial. it makes people nervous. They're in a clinical trial. We've gotten an experimental vaccine. Did I make a mistake? Should I have not enrolled in that trial? And then so these are very common things. And every trial that we do, we have a control group just for this reason.
Okay. Is there any good explanation why children had a better immune response to the vaccination compared to adults or to older cohorts?
So what I would say is that the reason I like being a pediatrician, because children are growing organisms and that they're strong and they're healthy. And as we're getting, how shall I say it, more mature, that our immune response does not work as well. If you look at a flu vaccine, we use the same dose of flu vaccine in a 6-month-old as we do in a 64-year-old. And it's when we get to 65 is that we actually have to increase the antigen in the flu vaccine, because you need that bigger stimulus to get the immune system to respond. So I'm not really that surprised that the younger children are responding well. And actually what we did in the later on trials in the kids under 12 is that we re-looked at the dose to see, do we need to use the same amount of antigen, same amount of mRNA.
Okay. What is your opinion on what kind of vaccine we should be using in children? Do you think we should be using mRNA-based vaccines or vector-based vaccines?
So a little over a year ago, when we started the clinical trials, we knew we were in the middle of a pandemic. We knew that people were dying and being hospitalized at alarming rates. And so we basically said, let's try every kind of vaccine that we know and see if we can get one that will work. And so in the United States, what was done was the mRNA vaccines, the adenoviral vector vaccines, and then the protein-based vaccines, similar to the more standard, if you will, vaccines. Other countries have used live attenuated viruses or killed virus, so that there's many different ways. And we tried to see if we, with the hope of getting one that would work. And so right now, we have multiple vaccines that have worked. So that's a good problem, actually. And that, so I think, if you look at what are we trying to do? If our goal is to wipe out the common cold, which would be nice, it'd put me out of business, but it'd be nice, that the mRNA vaccines, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine and BioNTech vaccine may be a little more effective from that. If you're looking at what we as doctors, I think, are really trying to prevent, which is hospitalization, ICU admission, and death, that all of the vaccines have been very effective in the terms of 85% or above. So I think part of the thing is that there's been some confusion because the way the results are being presented, and some people say, companies obviously want you to buy their vaccines. So if they're going to say this one's 95%, but it's only 80 here, and that, so now we're starting to get into a little bit of marketing versus science. But from a medical standpoint, I think that all of the vaccines have proven very effective, that the vaccines have had a good safety profile, and that when people ask me, I say, go get a vaccine. And that I don't really make preferences much. We have people, there's sections in the United States where they prefer the Janssen vaccine because they prefer one dose and done. They okay, I'll go in, I'll get that one dose, I'm not coming back. Give me the one dose and I'll take that. And so in that situation, I definitely have been recommending the Janssen vaccine because it has shown good efficacy even with the one dose.
Okay, thank you. There have been some reports about myocarditis in young people in Israel. So, do you think that could become a problem in children or adults, young adults, who get the vaccination? Have you seen any of those reports or not?
So, in hospital, we have not seen any. There have been in the United States, we have what's called WEITERE, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And then so anybody can report to that system. And then also the FDA collects information after clinical trials have been done, and still people are getting vaccines. Out of that, we've had 78 cases reported in the United States in children 12 to 18 years of age. And that's about a threefold increase of what you'd expect. But these cases are still being evaluated, and that trying to really figure out, are they all myocarditis? Are they all similar? And so I think at this point, what I would say is that there have been reports, and we're investigate them. But at the worst case right now, the incidence is about 1 in 100,000. So it's an incredibly rare complication. The other thing is that it's been almost all in boys. I really don't understand that, but it's been almost all in boys, and that they've recovered and gone home. They've had a good outcome. So that doesn't downplay it. It doesn't. We don't need to look at it. We do need to look at it. We do need to understand it further. But right now, it's very rare. Like I said, about 1 in 100,000, and that the kids that have gotten it have recovered and done okay. And we're really still trying to understand, are these all vaccine related, or how many of them are just from the general background of life?
Okay, maybe one last question. As of now in Germany, our National Vaccination Committee does not recommend vaccines in children younger than 16 years. Is there a general guideline in the United States with regard to vaccinating young people, or is still not out there?
So in the US right now, we have what's called the Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA, and that allows the companies to distribute vaccines before the licensing has been fully completed. And it's only when there is an emergency that you can use this. We still are going to go through the same process. We're still going to do the same detailed evaluation before licensing, but for the emergency use, that's to get a vaccine out to try to stop the pandemic. Currently in the United States, it's 12 years of age and above are eligible for a vaccine through the EUA. We are working on trials right now. We're working below 12 years of age. Next week, we'll be starting on children 6 months up to 5 years of age that we've completed in the United States, the enrollment for the 5 to 11 years of age. So I think vaccination is important. I think that if you look at, again, that our data is that the highest rates, that cases per 100,000 are happening in 15 to 35-year-olds. That's the highest rate by far in the United States.
Just one final question.
Sure.
Why did you pick the age of 12 and not 11 or 10 or 13?
It's rather random, but that so you could have made any of those choices. It's kind of a break between elementary school and middle school in the United States is where it is, but there's no scientific basis for that. That was a rather random choice.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
So I would have some final questions from a German perspective again. So, as you're well aware, we have a lot of discussion here with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which you don't have on your market. So you don't have all this discussion with TTS and VITT. Do you expect that the AstraZeneca vaccine will play any role in pediatrics, or will they just stop any efforts to get into the market?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, if I were looking at it, say there's 3 vaccines that already have been approved for EUA, and a 4th one, Novavax, which is the protein-based vaccine, has just released data to show 90% efficacy. I think it may be a tough market, but I really don't know what they're planning on doing.
Whereas you would expect the Moderna vaccine to be licensed for adolescents quite in a few weeks or so?
Yes, I mean, so the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was licensed for approved for use in the children 12 and above a couple months ago, and then Moderna just release their data and say that they're going to be submitting to the FDA for have their EUA lowered to 12 also. That those data have not been published yet, though, that our study in the New England Journal is the only one that I've seen as far as where there's been peer-reviewed data. But the Moderna group is putting together the data, and hopefully it'll be submitted soon for review.
And when you go to even lower ages, like below 12 years, will you reduce the dosage, or will you go with the same dosage?
Yeah. So what we did is relook at the doses. So if you go back a year ago, we were trying to figure out what dose to use. And then so we looked at 10 in the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, looked at 10 micrograms, 20 micrograms, and 30 micrograms. And we had a group of 18 to 55, and we had a group of 65 and above. There was purposeful that 10-year gap there without any participants, because we wanted to have a lot of people in the 65 and above. And we were afraid if we went 18 and above, there'd be a lot of people 55 to 65 that may not be as high of risk. And so that's why there's that gap. If you look at the 10 microgram dose for 18 to 55, they had a very good immune response. The reason we went with 30 micrograms is because you needed the higher dose, much like I was saying with the flu vaccine, you needed the higher dose in the 65 and above to get a good immune response. And so we then looked at the 30 microgram dose in the younger adults and said, their safety profile is okay. We're in a pandemic. We really can't have this dose here, this dose here, this dose here. We're going to pick one dose, use the 30 microgram dose, and go forward. But like I said, if you look at that phase 1 data for 18 to 55, you probably could have used a 10 microgram dose and been okay, certainly 20 microgram. What we did then is in the kids under 12 is we redid that phase 1. So we had first the 5 to up to their 12th birthday, and we did 10 micrograms, then we increased to 20 micrograms to 30 micrograms. Then we went down in age from 2 to 4 years and did the same thing, and then 6 months to 2 years. So it's going to be that for the 6 months up to 5 years of age, that they'll be getting 3 micrograms actually, and that still gave a good immune response with an acceptable safety profile. And then the kids 5 to 12, I think it's going to be 10 micrograms. So we did relook at the dose and found we could decrease the dose and get a good immune response and make it safe for the children.
And then maybe some final 2 questions. I would be very curious to learn your ideas. As you're aware of people, and Sasha Meyer hinted to this, here in Germany, pediatricians are more reluctant actually to go for vaccination in adolescents. And even our politicians are somewhat more reluctant than US President Biden, who clearly advocates vaccination for adolescents. Do you understand why Europeans are less, going forward?
Well, I would say people are collecting their data and making their decisions on data. And, some of this is it's subjective a little bit as far as to what people are weighing the pros and the cons, and you can come up with different answers. And it doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. I firmly believe that people can look at data and come up with different decisions, and it doesn't make either one of them wrong. Unfortunately, we had some politics of where it made it look like unless you did it this way, you're wrong. I don't think that's correct. I think there's a lot of ways that you can evaluate data and come up with your own decision. The reason that we made the decision we did in the United States is because of the secondary effect. As I was mentioning to you, the children of the 15 and up to young adults in the 30s are the highest rate of infection in the United States. Part of the reason they're at a high rate of infection is because they think they're immortal, and they can do whatever and nothing's going to hurt them. And they say, well, you see, I've been out in parties and I've never seen people get that sick. And that can be true. But then you're thinking about yourself. Part of the thing for the vaccination is for community, for society. And that so by protecting and vaccinating the adolescents and young adults, we're also having a big secondary effect of protecting the older people who are at much greater risk. And the way I've been trying to tell people, said, okay, let's think about it this way. You aren't at that higher risk of getting an infection, but how would a bad infection, but how would you feel if you got COVID and you went home to go see your grandma and grandpa for some holiday or for dinner or something like that, and you gave them COVID and they died? And you know it happened because you gave them COVID. How would you feel? And this happens. It's not just a made-up story. This happens. And part of the reason it happens is because the young people don't know they have COVID. They're not trying to make somebody sick. They're not trying to hurt somebody. They just don't know because they aren't necessarily that sick. But again, everyone is at risk, and we don't know who's going to be that unusual one. Like I said, over 330 kids in the United States have got COVID and died. In the young adults, we've had over 3,000. And so these, again, were healthy people that got COVID and died. And so that's why I think the United States made the decision it did. A lot of it is trying to get as many people protected as possible so that we can decrease the likelihood of having the variant infections take hold, because if people don't get infected, you can't get the variants. And as a lot of people don't realize, even when we get infected, the virus can mutate during that time it has the infection in us. And then we're spreading a mutant strain because the virus doesn't just go in us and sit, it replicates. And every time it replicates, it has a chance to make a variant. That's how viruses exist and in the society, in a community, in the world. Is it if viruses never changed, we'd be able to kill them off easily. Our bodies would kill them off, but the viruses are always changing, so we're having to play catch up, and that's what we're trying not to do. We're trying to get ahead of the curve by immunizing everybody.
Mm. And then my very last question, what do you say to those who say, well, before giving the vaccine to adolescents or even young adults, somewhere between 20 or 30, we should first go to third world countries where there's such a paucity in vaccines? And I mean, these arguments come from time to time. What do you say to these people?
I think we should immunize everyone. One of the good things is that these vaccines can be made in huge numbers, and so that literally about 100 million doses per month. And so both Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna said they can make over 1 billion doses a year. I mean, that's still going to take a while to immunize everybody, but there's a lot of doses that can be made. And that's really, and AstraZeneca and Janssen have said they can make similar kind of numbers. And so that's really some of the beauty about this technology. It allows you, one, to modify your vaccine quickly if you need to, but two, make tremendous volumes. So I don't think those are mutually exclusive arguments. I would say immunize the world and include your population as part of the world that's getting immunized. But I totally agree. This is a world problem. This is something the nations that are more resource rich, it's our obligation to be helping countries that are resource poor, because this is not something that's a nationalistic problem. This is a world problem that's been a disaster for the world economy, for society in general, and we need to get back to normal.
Dr. Frenck, thanks a lot. It was a privilege to talk to you, and we're so grateful that you do these trials, because we know how difficult it is to perform trials in adults, and I think it's much more difficult even to do this in children, and therefore we're really happy to have you doing all this work. Have a nice afternoon in Cincinnati, and looking forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.